It was a crisp, early morning in the small town of Brightfield when a young woman named Ella woke up with a determined heart. For years she had dreamed of speaking English so naturally that she wouldn't have to pause and translate everything from her native language. She had studied vocabulary and grammar diligently, but what she truly longed for was the day she could simply think in English, fluently, effortlessly, and confidently. That morning she made a promise to herself. She would no longer hesitate, and she would no longer allow fear to stop her from becoming truly bilingual. Her journey began at a local cafe, where she was quietly reading an English magazine when her friend Ava joined her. The warm aroma of roasted coffee beans filled the air, and the gentle hum of conversations created a soothing background noise. Ava, who had spent several years living abroad, understood firsthand the challenges of mastering a second language. She took a sip of her cappuccino and gave Ella an encouraging look. Ella sighed, placing her magazine down. "I don't know how you do it, Ava. No matter how much I practice, I still translate everything in my head. By the time I figure out what to say, the moment has already passed. It's so frustrating." Ava nodded knowingly. "I used to be in the exact same situation. Back then I thought I was bad at English because I couldn't speak fluently. But the real problem wasn't my vocabulary or grammar. It was how my brain processed the language. I had to retrain myself to think directly in English." Ella leaned forward, eager to learn. "How did you do it? Did you wake up one day and suddenly start thinking in English?" Ava chuckled. "I wish. No, it took effort and daily practice. The first thing I did was stop relying on translation. It was hard at first because my brain wanted to default to my native language, but I forced myself to associate English words directly with their meanings instead of translating them back and forth." Ella furrowed her brows, contemplating Ava's words. "So, instead of thinking bon and then translating it into table, I should just see a table and immediately think table?" "Exactly. The goal is to form direct connections between words and their meanings in English. The more you do this, the more automatic it becomes. It's like teaching your brain a new habit." Ella nodded slowly, already considering ways to implement this advice into her daily routine. As she looked around the cafe, she silently named objects in English: the wooden table, the ceramic mug, the silver spoon resting on the saucer. Ava smiled. "You're already starting. That's the first step to rewiring your brain for English thinking." Determined to change, Ella began with a simple technique. Whenever she looked at everyday items, a table, a chair, a cup, she would name them in English. At home, she took it further, describing her surroundings in short English phrases. "The window is open," she would say, or, "The chair is wooden and comfortable." At first, it felt mechanical and awkward, as if she were a child learning to speak again. But over time, she started forming immediate connections between objects and their English names, rather than allowing Vietnamese words to come first. To deepen her practice, Ella carried a small notebook where she would jot down words she frequently encountered but didn't know in English. If she went for a walk and saw a flower she couldn't name, she would make a note. "Look up this flower's English name later." In the evening, she would use her English-to-English dictionary to expand her vocabulary, reading not only the meaning of each word but also example sentences that showed how native speakers used it in context. One day, she decided to challenge herself by narrating her morning routine in English from the moment she woke up. As she brushed her teeth, she thought, "I am brushing my teeth with a minty toothpaste." As she made breakfast, she murmured, "I am scrambling eggs and making toast." At first, it was slow, and sometimes she had to pause to find the right words. But the more she practiced, the more fluent and automatic her thinking became. Ella also began using mental imagery exercises. She would close her eyes and visualize a place, a park, a supermarket, a bookstore, and then describe it in English, mentally walking through the scene and naming everything she saw. This technique helped her internalize English thoughts without relying on external stimuli. Soon, English started appearing in unexpected moments. She would be sitting in the cafe and suddenly think, "The barista looks busy today." She would be on the bus and notice, "It's crowded. I might have to stand." These moments, though small, marked a significant shift. She was no longer forcing herself to think in English. It was happening naturally. Encouraged by these small victories, Ella decided to push herself further. She began challenging herself to hold entire inner monologues in English, not just short phrases. When she walked down the street, she would describe everything around her. "The leaves are rustling in the wind. That little girl is playing with her dog. The traffic light just turned green." At night, she reflected on her day in English, reviewing the conversations she had, what she accomplished, and even what she wanted to do differently tomorrow. One day, she took it to the next level by forcing herself to problem-solve in English. If she forgot something at home, she wouldn't allow herself to think, "Nin quain du roy." Instead, she restructured her thought. "Oh no, I forgot my notebook at home. What should I do? Should I go back and get it, or can I manage without it?" Engaging in problem-solving in English strengthened her mental agility, and allowed her thoughts to flow more naturally. Over time, these exercises became second nature. She found that her brain started defaulting to English in more complex scenarios. She would get frustrated with a long grocery line and think, "Why is this taking so long?" instead of translating it from Vietnamese. She would check the weather forecast and immediately register, "It's going to rain tomorrow. I should take an umbrella." One afternoon, while waiting for a friend at a cafe, she absent-mindedly listened to conversations around her. Though most were in her native language, she found herself mentally translating them into English out of habit. It wasn't a forced exercise. Her brain had started doing it automatically. When her friend arrived and greeted her in Vietnamese, Ella had to pause for a split second before responding, realizing that she had been thinking in English the entire time. It was a surreal but satisfying moment. Encouraged by this progress, she started taking her learning outside the safe spaces of her home and solo activities. She challenged herself to engage in conversations with English-speaking strangers. At first, it was nerve-wracking. Her voice trembled, and she stumbled over words. But the more she did it, the more confident she became. She began visiting an English-speaking book club, where she forced herself to discuss novels in real time without mentally translating beforehand. One evening, she met a tourist who was lost and needed directions. Without hesitation, she gave them clear instructions in English, realizing afterward that she hadn't needed to think in Vietnamese at all. It was a turning point. She was no longer just practicing English, she was living it. Her next big challenge was public speaking. A local community event was hosting a panel discussion on cultural exchange, and an opportunity arose for her to participate. The idea of speaking in front of an audience terrified her, but she knew it was time to step out of her comfort zone. She prepared her speech entirely in English, rehearsing in front of a mirror, recording herself, and even practicing impromptu responses to potential questions. When the day of the event arrived, she was nervous but ready. Standing before the audience, she took a deep breath and began speaking. The words flowed naturally. There were a few minor stumbles, but she didn't panic or revert to translating in her head. She finished her speech to applause, and for the first time, she felt like she had truly conquered her fear of expressing herself in English without hesitation. From that moment on, English was no longer just a skill she was learning, it was a part of her identity. One afternoon, as she sat in a park watching children play, she realized how deeply embedded English had become in her thoughts. A woman walked by with a golden retriever, and instead of thinking, "Cho nai trong that de thuong," she instinctively thought, "That dog looks so fluffy and playful." These realizations filled her with pride. Her mind was evolving, rewiring itself to think in English without conscious effort. She started pushing herself further by engaging in hypothetical situations entirely in English. If she missed the bus, she'd think, "What should I do now? Should I take a taxi or wait for the next one?" If she forgot an ingredient while cooking, she'd debate, "Can I substitute this with something else? Will it change the flavor too much?" Problem-solving in English added a new layer of fluency to her thinking process, making her responses more natural and quick. Ella also experimented with storytelling in her mind. As she walked through town, she created fictional narratives about the people she saw. "The man in the blue suit looks like he's heading to an important meeting. Maybe he's a lawyer, or maybe he's closing a big business deal." This activity not only made her walks more entertaining, but also strengthened her ability to structure thoughts in English beyond simple observations. She also found herself dreaming in English. One morning, she woke up realizing that her entire dream had played out in English, without translation, without hesitation. It was a clear sign of how deeply her subconscious had accepted the language. The milestone thrilled her, reinforcing her belief that consistent exposure and practice were reshaping the way she processed language. These experiences became her new normal, transforming not just her speech but her entire way of thinking. English was no longer a foreign language she had to work hard to use, it had become part of her identity. She also expanded her practice by talking to herself aloud when she was alone. Cooking became an English lesson. "I'm chopping onions. I need to add some salt now. This smells delicious." Getting ready in the morning turned into a narrated routine. "I need to wear something warm today. Maybe I'll choose my blue sweater." These simple acts solidified English as her primary mode of thought, and soon, she realized she was no longer merely practicing, she was living in English. One morning, as she made coffee, she caught herself thinking in her native language and immediately switched to English. "I am scooping coffee grounds into the filter," she said quietly. She started narrating her everyday life, whether she was cooking or walking through the local market. This constant, gentle self-talk helped her discover that truly living in English meant using it for all of life's small details. In addition to naming objects, Ella began using an English-to-English dictionary. No longer satisfied with quick bilingual translations, she sought deeper comprehension in English alone. When she found a new word, she read its definition in English and immersed herself in examples. This approach removed the extra mental step of translation and opened her eyes to how English words connect with each other. Overwhelmed at times by complex grammar, Ella reminded herself to keep her thoughts simple. Whenever anxiety made her stumble, she allowed herself to form shorter sentences like, "I need vegetables," or "I feel tired." Gradually, these simple declarations expanded into more descriptive statements. She paid less attention to getting everything perfectly right and more attention to speaking spontaneously, discovering that short, basic English thoughts paved the way for natural-sounding fluency. Ella's next breakthrough came when she started forming an inner English voice. As she walked her dog through Brightfield's tranquil streets, she asked herself, "What should I do today?" and answered in English as well. Though it felt like juggling two internal dialogues, one in her native tongue and one in English, she soon saw how this method strengthened her mental switch to English. Her mind was becoming more comfortable creating and responding to English thoughts. Brightfield was small, and not everyone spoke English, but Ella refused to let that be a barrier. She changed her phone settings to English, listened to English podcasts, and watched videos on her hobbies in English. She discovered audiobooks she played during chores, and she even joined a local English club to practice with others. Determined to immerse herself further, she started thinking of creative ways to bring English into every part of her daily life. She stuck post-it notes with English words on household objects, reinforcing her vocabulary every time she reached for the refrigerator, the mirror, or the cupboard. When shopping, she would mentally list the groceries in English, repeating, "I need tomatoes, lettuce, chicken, and milk," as she walked through the aisles. Ella also committed to changing her entertainment habits. Instead of watching movies with subtitles in her native language, she switched to English subtitles first, then progressed to watching entirely in English without assistance. She picked up English novels, starting with children's books before gradually moving to more complex literature. Even during her workouts, she would listen to English fitness instructions, repeating phrases to herself as she followed along. The real breakthrough came when she started engaging with native speakers online. She joined discussion forums on topics she was passionate about, leaving comments and participating in debates. She found a language exchange partner who wanted to learn Vietnamese, and in return, they practiced English together through daily voice messages. Each conversation was a challenge, but each was also an opportunity to reinforce her thinking habits in English. Little by little, her mental default began to shift away from Vietnamese. The change became even more apparent when she moved to the United Kingdom. Immersed in an entirely English-speaking environment, she found herself thinking in English more naturally. Living in London, a city filled with diverse accents and dialects, posed a new challenge. The British expressions, the way people structured sentences, and even the humor were different from what she had learned before. Navigating daily life, ordering food in local cafes, taking the tube, socializing in pubs, and even dealing with minor inconveniences, forced her brain to rely solely on English. There was no safety net of her native language, no fallback when she couldn't find the right words. Instead, she adapted, found alternative expressions, and learned to embrace imperfection in communication. She quickly learned that British English had its own quirks. When asking for directions, she was initially puzzled by the phrase, "just around the corner," when the place seemed much farther than expected. She learned that "cheers" wasn't just a word for toasting but also a casual way of saying, "thank you." Small cultural discoveries like these made her experience richer and deepened her connection to the language. Despite the initial culture shock, she soon realized that she was no longer just practicing English, she was living it. The language wasn't just a skill she was improving, it was shaping her daily experiences and interactions in profound ways. She started realizing that even in moments of stress or excitement, her thoughts naturally formed in English first. When she was running late for work, she panicked in English. "I need to hurry, or I'll miss the bus." When she laughed at a joke with her colleagues, she didn't translate it, she simply understood. These bursts of immersion were no longer just practice. They were becoming a way of life, a transformation of her identity, as she fully embraced the language of her new home. To make her progress stick, Ella established a rigorous and immersive daily routine. Each morning, she would plan her entire day in English, detailing her schedule with specific tasks. "Today is Tuesday. I have a meeting at noon with the marketing team. I need to finish my report before lunch, then buy groceries in the evening." She challenged herself to think in complete English sentences rather than fragmented thoughts. She expanded her self-imposed 30-minute no translation rule, gradually increasing it to an hour, then 2, until large portions of her day were spent entirely in English. To reinforce this habit, she would switch her thought process when engaging in different activities. When making breakfast, she narrated the steps to herself. "I am cracking 2 eggs into the pan. I need to flip them before they burn." When exercising, she listened to guided English workouts, repeating the phrases, "Keep your core tight. Exhale as you lift." To make English a part of her social life, she began leaving voice messages in English to her language exchange partner instead of just typing. This forced her to think quickly and naturally without overanalyzing grammar. At night, she kept a detailed English journal, not just documenting her day but also reflecting on her emotions, challenges, and accomplishments. If she struggled to find the right words, she would describe things in alternative ways rather than reverting to translation. Instead of writing, "I felt exhausted," she would expand her thoughts. "I felt drained after my long meeting, as if my energy had been squeezed out like a wet sponge." Over time, this process deepened her expressive ability in English. Despite occasional frustration, she reminded herself that fluency was not perfection but persistence. Every moment spent thinking in English, no matter how small, was progress toward her ultimate goal of true bilingualism. Inevitably, challenges appeared. When she was tired, she reverted to Vietnamese thoughts without realizing it. Frustrated at times, she remembered Ava's advice to stay patient and celebrate small successes. Whenever she lacked the words to express something, she used descriptive phrases instead of translating. And whenever she questioned whether her progress was real, she recorded her speaking practice and listened weeks later, hearing a noticeable improvement. Finally, her transformation became clear on a cool autumn day, when she joined an international botanical art conference held in London. The Grand Hall was filled with artists, collectors, and enthusiasts from around the world, each eagerly awaiting the discussion on the intersection of nature and creativity. Introductions were in English, and she had to present herself in front of a highly skilled audience. The mere thought of speaking in such a setting might have paralyzed her months ago, but this time, she felt different. Nervous at first, she took a deep breath, steadied herself, and realized that the words were coming naturally. She introduced herself with confidence, sharing her background and how she found inspiration in the delicate beauty of flowers. She told engaging anecdotes about her early struggles with botanical art, about how painting was once a silent escape, but later became a powerful means of expression. As she spoke, she was fully immersed in the moment, effortlessly stringing together sentences without pausing to translate. She was simply thinking in English, experiencing English as her own. The audience responded warmly, nodding along, engaged by her sincerity and passion. By the end of the session, participants praised her eloquence, with several artists approaching her to discuss her techniques and inspirations. A renowned British art critic even complimented her ability to convey emotion through her words, calling her presentation both insightful and captivating. One attendee from Canada asked if she had grown up speaking English, which made her laugh in delight. Another, an elderly artist from France, shared how he had struggled with learning English himself and found her journey inspiring. As the evening went on, she found herself effortlessly conversing with artists from different backgrounds, sharing ideas and perspectives without a second thought. It was in that moment that she fully grasped just how far she had come. That night, as she reflected on the experience, Ella knew she had surpassed a critical milestone. Her mind could operate in English without constant worry or hesitation. Her friend Ava summed it up perfectly. You never really needed translation. You just needed to trust that your mind could embrace a new language. Everything else was just practice. Though Ella continued to learn new words and sharpen her skills, she understood that thinking in English was now a permanent part of her life. Every interaction, from ordering coffee at a local cafe to attending lectures at an art museum, reinforced her ability to function seamlessly in an English-speaking world. As she moved forward, making new friends, exploring new subjects, and even planning her first trip to another European country, she felt an unshakable confidence that had once seemed unattainable. She no longer hesitated before speaking, no longer second-guessed her sentence structure. When meeting new people, she engaged in conversations without fearing mistakes, focusing instead on connection and understanding. Her story stood as proof that immersion, consistency, and daily practice could reshape the way one experiences language. She realized that the shift was not just about fluency. It was about embracing an entirely new way of seeing and interacting with the world. English was no longer just a language she had learned, it was now a part of her identity, shaping her thoughts, her aspirations, and her future in ways she had never imagined. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Epic English Stories channel for more tips and strategies on learning English. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Together, let's make reading in English a fun and fulfilling part of your language.